Welcome to a story of silence, sacrifice, and the kind of peace that only comes when someone chooses to stand still. This is Echo of the Silent Guardian, a science fiction tale woven with memory, mystery, and a quiet strength that reaches across species, across generations, across war and time itself. In a world where ancient covenants once held the fragile peace between humans and an alien race known as the Xeyari, one man's quiet act changes everything. This isn't a tale of loud battles or shining heroes. It's the story of a soldier who touched something sacred and became the bridge between two worlds. So find a quiet space, let the noise of your day fade, and listen closely. Because sometimes the most powerful echoes come from those who never speak a word. The descent onto Varion Prime rattled Kael Riven more than he expected. From the small porthole of the Talon craft, the planet stretched below like a battlefield long forgotten. Scarred ridges, scorched valleys, and fractured stone spines carved by orbital bombardments. Even after the so-called peace, the wounds hadn't healed. Kael tightened his grip on the metal rail as the shuttle bucked through atmosphere. Around him, the other recruits sat stiff and silent, boots polished, uniform sharp. He felt like a ghost among them, older by pain, not age. The war had ended a decade ago, but for Kael, its echoes had never stopped. The moment the Talon craft touched down, the hatch hissed open with a rush of dry air thick with iron and ash. Kael stepped out, his boots crunching against gravel that had once been part of the city wall. A faded banner flapped in the wind. Honor through obedience. The old slogans still lingered like stains. No one greeted them. No fanfare. Just a lone signal beacon flashing cold blue on the edge of a gutted outpost. The induction site. Kael had seen holos of it during briefings, a place where Terran recruits came to be reminded of their victory over the Xeyari. But the place looked abandoned now. Deserted. Forgotten. His boots echoed in the open courtyard as he followed the others toward the rusted archway. Something didn't feel right. There were no instructors, no security drones, just the distant hum of a broken generator and the quiet moan of wind slipping through empty corridors. Kael slowed as they approached a row of statues lining the plaza's heart. They were humanoid, Xeyari forms cast in obsidian, their features beautiful, regal, yet contorted in pain. At the center stood a larger figure, hooded, arms crossed in solemn defiance. She wasn't like the others. There was something haunting about her stillness, like she wasn't carved, but waiting. Lieutenant Joranvale called out orders, breaking Kael's stare. Line up. Pay your respects. Kael hesitated. Respect? For what? For stones shaped to mock a people nearly wiped out? For a tradition built on forced remembrance? But he moved anyway. As the line inched forward, Kael's thoughts wandered to his mother Mira, who had lit candles every night during the war and never told him why. To his brother the Run, who'd stayed behind in Nova Alera, always questioning but never joining. And to the dream that haunted Kael since childhood, a woman's voice whispering across the stars, full of sorrow. Now, standing in front of the hooded statue, Kael looked up and felt it. Not fear, not awe, recognition. The wind paused, and the silence leaned in. The command came again, more insistent this time. Each of you, step forward and honor the seal. Forehead to stone. Lieutenant Vale's voice echoed through the courtyard, clipped and rehearsed, like he'd said it 100 times but never once questioned it. The line moved slowly, each recruit pressing their brow to the black stone figure, then stepping aside with hollow eyes. No one spoke. No one dared. Kael stood 3 places back, his breath tight in his throat. Honor the seal. He looked again at the hooded statue. Its surface shimmered faintly under the harsh light of Varion Prime's midday suns, a texture more organic than it should have been. The hood cast a shadow over the face, yet Kael could feel eyes beneath it. Watching, waiting, not stone, something more. The recruit ahead of him finished. Then another. Kael stepped forward. The moment he stood before the figure, the hum in the air changed. A low frequency, almost inaudible but pulsing deep in his chest like a second heartbeat. He blinked, unsettled. The others didn't seem to notice it. "Proceed," Vale ordered. Kael reached out with one hand, touching the cool surface. It wasn't like stone. It gave slightly like flesh held in stasis. His pulse quickened. He leaned forward. The moment his forehead made contact, everything stopped. The wind, the noise, the recruits behind him, time itself. In that instant, something ancient reached back. Visions poured into Kael's mind. Not images, but sensations. Searing heat, rushing stars, grief so heavy it cracked worlds. A voice, soft but unyielding, whispered in a language he'd never learned yet somehow understood. "Why did you wake me?" Kael gasped and stumbled back. His knees struck the stone platform. The statue trembled. A faint crack ran down the center of the hooded figure's face. The entire plaza held its breath. Lieutenant Vale stepped forward, hand hovering over his arc rifle. "What the hell did you do?" I don't know," Kael stammered. "I just touched it." Another crack splintered outward, tracing the neck down the chest. Then a sound like stone exhaling. The figure's arms slowly unfurled. The hood slid back in crumbling flakes, revealing a woman beneath, not made of marble or steel, but of living, pale skin streaked with stasis residue. Her eyes opened, glowing, iridescent, deeply alien, and locked with Kael's. She took one breath. The sky above them shimmered, and Kael knew something sacred had just been undone. The other recruits backed away in panic. Vale shouted for security, but Kael couldn't move, couldn't look away. The statue was no longer a statue. She was alive, and she had just awakened from a prison no one truly understood. Screams erupted. Recruits scattered across the courtyard like startled birds, their boots clattering against fractured stone. The sound of weapons powering up hissed through the air as soldiers on Overwatch scrambled into position. But none of them fired. No one quite knew what they were aiming at. Kael stayed frozen, kneeling at the foot of the now broken statue. No, not a statue. A woman. She collapsed forward. Kael instinctively caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was strangely warm, damp with some kind of translucent fluid that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cold but soft. Her hair clung to his arm, silver black and streaked with the dust of time. Around them, the world seemed to forget how to react. "What is that thing?" Vale's voice cut through the confusion, raw with fear. "She's not a thing," Kael whispered. "She's alive." The woman's eyes fluttered open, glowing at first, then slowly adjusting, dimming as if relearning how to see. Her pupils were elliptical, shifting between human and something else. She looked up at him, not with fear, but recognition, as if she had known him long before either of them existed. Then the air split with a deep vibration. Every screen, every HUD, every LifeSkin unit in the outpost blinked erratically. Kael's wrist pad flashed red, then static, then an unidentifiable glyph, curved, elegant, and older than Terran memory. Above them, the sun shimmered unnaturally, like viewed through rippling glass. "She's triggering something," Vale shouted. "Everyone fall back. This is a containment breach." Sergeant Dre Voss arrived with a squad, weapons raised. "Secure the recruit. Detain that, whatever she is." Kael didn't move. The woman tightened her grip on his sleeve, her fingers still weak but firm with silent urgency. "Don't let them take me." Her voice rasped, barely audible but real. It was the same voice from Kael's dreams. He stood, shielding her with his body. "She's not hostile. She didn't attack anyone." Voss sneered. "You think you're the first rookie to fall for alien psych tricks? Step aside." But the earth answered first. A sound like stone grinding against stone rose from beneath the plaza. One of the other statues, an arm cracked. Then another, not awakening, but disintegrating. The materials weren't just cracking, they were reverting, turning into dust, fading like illusions exposed to light. Whatever held the other figures together had been tethered to her. And now that she was free, the rest could no longer pretend. "She was the seal," Kael murmured. "The real one." Voss didn't listen. "This is a security failure. Get them both on the ship now." But before they could act, the skies above shimmered again, this time not from heat or hallucination. A pulse radiated out from the woman's body. It wasn't visible but felt. Every being in the courtyard staggered, clutched their chests, and looked upward. A presence stirred in orbit. Kael looked down at her, heart pounding. "Who are you?" The woman blinked slowly, her voice steadier this time. "My name is Celia Noor, and you've just broken the covenant." The pulse had no sound, no visible light. Yet across the surface of Varion Prime, and far beyond its orbit, the wave reached everything it was meant to reach, and nothing it wasn't. Hidden deep beneath the planet's crust, old Xeyari signal arrays, dormant for over a century, flickered to life. Long-forgotten glyph nodes glowed with violet energy, as if breathing after a long slumber. In the upper stratosphere, cloaked structures once thought to be debris shifted silently, aligning with one another in orbit. No Terran satellite registered the change. Across the void of space, the signal passed through rifts in reality, carried by threads unknown to Terran science. Its destination was clear, the lost Xeyari fleet. And they heard it. In the cold silence between stars, massive ships, dark and living, stirred from slumber. They weren't built like Terran vessels. They were grown, sculpted from organic alloys, and pulsing with faint bioluminescence. Their hulls bore no insignia, but their presence announced intent. Guardians awakened. Inside the command tower of the Terran outpost, alarms blared. Admiral Rax Thorn slammed his hand down on a console. "Give me a clear scan. What the hell just activated over our heads?" "No known signal pattern, sir," replied the comms officer, sweat beading on his brow. "It's not Terran. It's broadcasting through old alien bands. Ancient ones. Pre-covenant. Scramble orbital surveillance. If this is a Xeyari probe, I want a flag now." But it wasn't just a probe. Outside, the sky darkened. Not from weather, but from mass. A ship, larger than any known Terran registry, drifted into low orbit, casting a long shadow over the outpost. It didn't transmit a hail. It didn't respond to pings. And it didn't need to, because in every Xeyari tongue, across every translation grid, the message it sent was clear. The covenant has been broken. The seal is unbound. Down below, Kael stood beside Celia as she leaned on him for strength. She wasn't surprised. She didn't flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on the dark shape above. "They're coming," she said softly. "All of them." Kael swallowed, his voice barely a whisper. "For you?" Celia shook her head. "For all of us." The transmission came in without warning, piercing every Terran frequency, cutting through encryption like it was air. The voice was not synthetic, yet not quite organic. It held layers, like multiple minds speaking in one breath. Its tone was measured, ancient, unshaken. "This is the Xeyari ascendancy. The covenant has been shattered. Your victory is revoked. Stand down and prepare to answer." In the Terran Outpost Command Center, silence fell heavier than the alarms ever could. Admiral Thorn clenched his jaw, staring at the shifting glyphs streaming across the monitors. None of the linguistics AIs could fully translate them. They weren't meant to. "This is an act of war," muttered Lieutenant Vale from behind him. "No," Thorn corrected. "This is a reckoning." Outside, soldiers scrambled. The outpost defense systems, ancient, half-repurposed during the peace years, were brought online for the first time in decades. Arc rifles were distributed. Patrols doubled. Emergency drills initiated. Yet none of it felt like preparation. It felt like desperation. Kael, meanwhile, sat in a holding room beneath the main compound, alone, wrists bound to the table, breath shallow. His ears still rang from the pulse. His thoughts were a blur of stone and voice and light and her. He didn't regret touching the statue. He regretted not asking what it really was. The door hissed open. Sergeant Voss entered with 2 armored escorts. "You've got a lot to explain," Voss snapped, throwing a datapad onto the table. "You caused a signal spike that lit up 5 systems. You compromised an ancient relic. And now we've got a Xeyari fleet hovering over our heads like ghosts." Kael didn't move. She was alive. That wasn't a relic. It was a prison. Then you just broke the wrong door open, Hero, Voss growled. They're not here to talk. Upstairs, another pulse rocked the compound, this one physical. Dust fell from the ceiling. The Xeyari weren't firing, but their ships were repositioning, tightening orbit, sending a clear message. The Terrans had made the first mistake. Now it was their turn to listen. The interrogation room smelled like recycled air and burnt circuitry. Fluorescent strips buzzed overhead, flickering in a way that made Kael's headache pulse behind his eyes. He sat shackled to the table, arms crossed, gaze steady. Across from him stood Admiral Raxthorn, rigid, towering, every inch the war legend the Terran Accord made him out to be. But there was something behind Thorn's eyes today that even history couldn't hide. Doubt. You have 10 seconds to explain what she was, Thorn said coldly. And why an entire fleet just reawakened because of you. Kael didn't flinch. I didn't cause it. She did. And you just happened to be in the right place at the right time, touching the wrong thing. Thorn slammed a gloved fist onto the table. Don't insult my intelligence, Riven. You made contact. You triggered something ancient, something we swore would never rise again. Kael leaned forward slightly. Then maybe the oath was a lie. Thorn's jaw tensed. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was cracking at the edges. Through the thick walls, distant sirens pulsed. Systems were failing, flickering, skipping diagnostics like the outpost itself was resisting reality. She's gone, Thorn muttered finally. We checked every scan zone, every corridor. She vanished without a trace. Not even a heat signature. Like she was never real. Kael closed his eyes for a beat. He could still feel the warmth of Celia's skin, the resonance in her voice. She was real. Too real. Do you believe in ghosts, Admiral? Kael asked. Thorn scoffed. I believe in protocols. And right now, I'm watching this outpost unravel from the inside out. And you're the only damn variable. Just then, the lights dimmed. Not a flicker, a pulse. Screens went black, then rebooted with foreign glyphs scrolling across them. Glyphs that no Terran encryption could stop. One console sparked and died. Kael looked up. She's not attacking. She's waking something. Thorn stared at the symbols, lips pressed tight. Waking what? Kael didn't answer. He didn't know. Not yet. A lieutenant burst into the room. Sir, we've lost external sensors. Communications are down. There's movement beneath the compound. It's not seismic, it's structured. Thorn cursed under his breath. Lock the entire sector. No one in, no one out. But when they returned to the corridor where Celia had last been held, all that remained was a shimmer in the air, a faint trail of dust like a body had passed through reality itself. The security footage was corrupted. No one had seen her leave. Kael, escorted back to his bunk under heavy guard, glanced once more at the blinking red emergency lights and whispered to himself. She's not running. She's leading. Kael waited until the second blackout. The first had hit during mealtime. Lights flickering, systems hiccuping, soldiers grumbling. But the second one felt intentional. It swept through the outpost like a breath held too long. And in that silence, Kael moved. He'd already memorized the shift rotations. The armory was locked, but the side chamber with field kits wasn't. Within minutes, he slipped into a maintenance corridor, wearing a rebreather mask and desert cloak stolen from a supply rack. No one stopped him. Everyone was too busy chasing ghosts on their screens. He didn't know exactly where he was going. Just away. Away from metal walls and frightened voices. Toward something older, something calling. The desert outside hit him like a furnace, even in the fading dusk. Varion Prime's winds didn't blow, they scraped. The terrain was jagged, all broken ridges and shifting sands, the remnants of a world burned too many times. He kept his pace steady, conserving water, following instinct more than logic. Or maybe it wasn't instinct. Maybe it was her. Every few minutes, Kael would pause and look to the horizon. He didn't see anything, no signal flares, no footprints, but he felt a pull. Not like gravity, like memory. His thoughts drifted to Thurin, his younger brother back on Nova Alera. Thurin had always believed in patterns beneath chaos, in the idea that things happen for reasons deeper than surface noise. Kael used to mock him for it. Now, he wasn't so sure. He found the first ruin just past midnight, half buried under dunes, its obsidian walls cracked and humming with residual heat. No Terran scans had marked this place. No patrol routes passed near it. It felt hidden on purpose. He stepped cautiously inside. The walls weren't dead stone. They pulsed with low light, as if recognizing him. Glyphs flickered along the surface, forming no language he knew, but somehow he understood. You are not alone. Kael moved deeper into the structure, the air growing cooler, the silence shifting from empty to expectant. And then he saw it, a faint trace of a footprint in the dust. Small, precise, not Terran issue. His breath caught. Celia had come this way. He pressed a hand to the nearest wall. It pulsed once beneath his palm. She wasn't running. She was waiting. And Kael knew, with a clarity that cut through doubt, he hadn't deserted. He was following fate. The deeper Kael moved into the ruins, the less the place obeyed the rules of space. Hallways bent at impossible angles. Doorways curved and reformed when he wasn't looking directly at them. Shadows shifted against walls where no light existed. It wasn't just ancient architecture. It was responsive, like the structure was listening, testing his presence. He passed beneath an arch etched with concentric glyphs. As he did, a low hum vibrated in his chest. Not painful, just persistent, like the place was scanning him not for threat, but for purpose. Kael slowed his breathing, hand resting on the hilt of the field knife he'd taken from the outpost. Not to draw it, just to remember who he was. Then the whispering started. At first, he thought it was his own thoughts rebounding in the silence. But the voices weren't his. They spoke in languages he didn't know, yet somehow understood, a harmony of memory fragments and ancient longing. Visions flickered across the walls like light passing through old film. A Xeyari council in mourning, a storm swallowing a fleet, a woman standing alone before a sea of stone. Every image had the same face. Celia. She appeared again, not in vision, but in reality, as Kael stepped into a domed chamber where the air suddenly tasted of ozone and frost. She stood at its center, surrounded by holographic projections of Xeyari script and starlit maps suspended midair. Her back was to him, fingers dancing over the air as if the walls themselves were a console. Kael froze. Celia. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable at first, but her eyes softened when they met his. She looked different now, stronger. Her skin no longer shimmered with the haze of stasis. The lines of her body carried purpose. She wasn't lost. She was home. You found it, she said quietly. Or it found you. Kael approached slowly, the whispers fading as he neared her. What is this place? Memory, she answered. A fragment of Lorikin, the city that once stood here. This ruin remembers things the universe tried to forget. He looked around, watching the walls respond to her presence. It's alive. In a way, she nodded. Built by hands but shaped by thought. It only responds to those who carry the mark of the seal. Kael raised an eyebrow. Me? Celia smiled faintly. You touched me when the covenant broke. That left a trace. The ruins recognized the bond. He let the weight of that settle before asking. So what now? Are you hiding here? No, she said. I'm listening. She turned back to the glyphs and placed her hand on a glowing node. Instantly, the projections shifted, showing images of Terran outposts, Xeyari ships, pulses of energy traveling between systems. It's waking, she whispered. The old network. The one the Covenant kept asleep. Kael stepped beside her. And if it wakes fully... Celia looked up, eyes glowing once more. Then nothing we know will remain the same. They sat beneath the central arch of the ruin, where light from a broken skylight bathed the chamber in soft violet. The air felt still, almost reverent. Around them, the walls continued to pulse faintly, slower now, calmer, as if acknowledging the quiet between the questions. Celia ran her fingers along the edge of a half-buried console, her gaze distant. You were never meant to find me, Kael. Not like this. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. Then why now? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, She reached into a small compartment embedded in the floor, a panel that slid open as if sensing her intent, and pulled out a small crystalline object. It shimmered like trapped lightning, its edges etched with moving glyphs. "This," she said, holding it out to him, "is the pulse shard. It's not a weapon. It's a messenger." Kael took it carefully. The moment his skin touched its surface, a soft tone rang in his ears. Images flashed in his mind. Councils gathered, hands raised in unity, the moment of the Covenant's creation. A living agreement between Terran and Xeyari, bound by flesh, not paper. He stared at her. "You were part of this." "I was the Covenant," she said. "Not just a guardian. The seal itself. My body. My presence. I stood between two species so they would never destroy each other again. And they turned you into a statue." Her smile was faint, bitter. "Terrans demanded proof of surrender. Xeyari offered me. A living sentinel. I volunteered, believing they would honor the pact. And did they? For a time," she said softly. "Until memory faded. Until they forgot I was alive inside it." Kael felt the shard pulse in his palm. "Then I broke it." "You freed me," she corrected. But in doing so, the balance was undone. The shard sent its signal. The old systems heard. The Xeyari returned. Not for war, but for judgment. Kael shook his head. "They're positioning warships in orbit. That doesn't look like judgment. It looks like preparation." Celia stood, looking toward a distant glyph that now glowed brighter than the others. "Because they don't trust what they'll find. Would you, after being silenced for a century?" He rose with her, holding the shard tightly. "Then what happens now?" She turned to him, eyes unreadable. "Now we decide whether peace was ever real or just an illusion we both chose to believe in." And for the first time, Kael understood what it meant to carry history, not just as a lesson, but as a burden stitched into the bones of the living. They left the ruins at dawn. The sky over Varion Prime was a pale gold wash, deceptively peaceful. Wind whipped across the dunes in sweeping arcs, carving fresh scars over the bones of old battles. Kael and Celia moved quickly, their path winding through canyons scorched by orbital strikes from wars no one remembered the names of. Kael carried the pulse shard tucked tightly against his chest, hidden beneath his cloak. It hummed softly now, as if sensing what lay ahead. They were halfway through a ravine when Celia stopped cold. Her body tensed, not with fear, but familiarity. She raised a hand. "Down!" Kael dropped into the sand behind her just seconds before a soft hum echoed overhead, a low-altitude glide. From behind a ridge, sleek Terran patrol drones swept across the canyon, scanning the terrain with harsh blue beams. They didn't detect Kael or Celia yet. The ruins had done something to them both. Their energy signatures no longer matched any standard Terran readout. Celia whispered, "They're searching for you." "For us," Kael corrected. "They think we're both the threat now." She didn't argue. They slipped through the narrowest pass in the canyon, emerging into an open bowl of scorched stone. That's when the air changed again, not from the wind, but from the atmosphere itself. A high-pitched tone rang out, barely audible, but instinctively terrifying. From the western ridge, shadowy figures emerged. Xeyari strike troopers in full battle gear, their armor pulsing with light in organic patterns, almost like breathing. They moved with lethal precision, ignoring Kael and Celia completely, because they weren't here for them. On the far side of the canyon, a Terran patrol came into view, 4 soldiers in standard recon gear, weapons raised the moment they saw movement. One of them shouted. The others spread out. Kael recognized one of them. "Vale," he breathed. There was no time for warning. The Xeyari opened fire, not with plasma, not with bullets, but with ribbons of kinetic energy that folded light and tore through space. The first Terran dropped instantly. The second tried to dive for cover, but was disintegrated mid-motion. The third returned fire, too late. The fourth ran. Celia turned her head away. Kael watched, frozen, not because of fear, but because of clarity. He saw the future unraveling in that instant. This wasn't escalation. This was inevitability. When the last Terran hit the ground, the canyon went silent again. The Xeyari troopers vanished into the rocks, just as quickly as they'd appeared. No trophies. No broadcast. Just execution. Kael exhaled shakily. The war didn't start again, he whispered. It never truly ended, Celia replied. They had just cleared the upper ridge when the rocks gave way beneath them. Kael heard it first, a hollow snap beneath their feet, then a thunderous cascade as the ridge wall broke apart in a landslide of sharp stone and dust. He threw himself forward, instinct overriding thought, but Celia wasn't as lucky. A jagged slab clipped her leg mid-leap, sending her tumbling hard down the slope. Celia, he shouted, sliding after her. By the time he reached her, she was half buried beneath fractured rubble, her cloak torn, eyes shut tight in pain. Blood, thick and dark violet, oozed from a gash along her thigh. It wasn't human blood, but it smelled of metal and ozone, strangely electric. She tried to rise. Failed. I'm fine, she lied, already trying to push him away. You're not, he said, kneeling beside her. Let me see. Celia winced as he peeled back the torn fabric. Her muscles beneath the skin shimmered faintly, fibrous and interwoven with faint bioluminescence. Her body wasn't fragile. It was resilient, built for endurance, but whatever hit her had gone deep. He cleaned the wound with water from his canteen, ignoring her protests, and used a patch from his medkit to close the tear. The material hissed against her skin and fused almost instantly, adapting to her unique physiology. She let out a slow breath, her posture relaxing slightly. You heal fast, he murmured. Not always, she replied. Her voice had softened, and in it, Kael heard more than pain. He heard regret. They sat in silence for a while, the wind curling around the rocks like a quiet whisper. Kael studied her out of the corner of his eye, not just the alien lines of her features, but the way she carried herself, even injured, even exposed like someone used to standing alone. You've been through worse, he said quietly. Celia didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon. You don't survive a century sealed in stone without learning to shut the world out. Kael felt something shift between them. Not pity, but understanding. Did it hurt, he asked. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. The ceiling or the forgetting? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She looked down at her leg, then up at him. There were others before you, Kael. Others who found me, or tried to. But none stayed. None listened. He met her gaze. I'm still here. That silence again. This time, not between strangers, but two survivors learning how to carry what couldn't be spoken. A warning cry echoed in the distance, metallic and sharp. Federation scans. Celia struggled to her feet, Kael catching her arm. We need to move. He nodded, tightening the strap on his pack. But as they turned back toward the shadows of the valley, Kael knew the landslide hadn't just uncovered her wound. It had uncovered something deeper, something still bleeding between them both. The ridge narrowed as Kael and Celia pressed forward, her steps uneven but determined. Each time she stumbled, Kael reached out, not to carry her, but to steady her just enough so she could carry herself. The terrain around them offered little cover. Jagged cliffs, open sandbanks, and the bleached bones of war machines long dead. Above them, the sky pulsed with activity. Federation dropships swept across the upper stratosphere in tight grid patterns, their scanners pinging rhythmically through the calm silence. Kael recognized the maneuver, wide-net acquisition. They weren't just looking for threats. They were looking for someone. And not far behind, further west along the magnetic fault line, Kael caught sight of movement low to the ground, Xeyari patrols. Sleek, silent, almost spectral in their grace, weaving through the rocks like they knew the planet better than it knew itself. He ducked behind an outcropping, pulling Celia down with him. Both sides, he muttered. They're converging. They don't trust what they didn't create, Celia said quietly, her eyes tracking the ships above. They don't see me as a person anymore, just as a trigger. Kael clenched his jaw. Or a weapon. She didn't disagree. A Federation drone zipped overhead, scanning the ridge with beams of cold white light. Kael flattened against the rock, Celia beside him. The beam passed harmlessly over them, thanks, perhaps, to whatever residual cloak the ruins had left on them. But the message was clear. Time was running out. "We need to head underground," Kael whispered. "There's an entrance ahead," Celia replied. "Old supply tunnels beneath the resonant hollow." He frowned. "That's our destination." She looked at him then, almost amused. It always was. As they moved again, slower now, more deliberate, Kael's mind churned. He had joined the Terran Accord believing in peace, in the hard work of rebuilding. But now that peace felt more like a curtain, thin and flammable, hung over a fault line no one wanted to admit was still shifting. Every search drone, every Xeyari scout, every whisper on the comms, they weren't tracking a fugitive. They were hunting a myth. And Kael realized, with a chill that settled deeper than fear, if either side got to Celia first, it wouldn't end in questions. It would end in containment. Or worse, reconstruction. As night fell, the canyons around them seemed to breathe. The sky turned indigo. Heat bled from the stones. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. And Kael, walking beside a woman caught between legends and governments, felt the world sharpening its edges. The entrance to the vault was nearly invisible, buried beneath layers of sand, shattered stone, and time itself. Only when the moons of Varion Prime crested the horizon did the glyphs on the canyon wall begin to glow faintly, revealing a doorway not carved but grown, as if the mountain had been persuaded to open rather than forced. Celia approached first, placing her palm against a spiral of symbols. The stone rippled beneath her touch like disturbed water, and with a low sigh, the wall parted. Kael followed her inside, boots echoing softly against a corridor far older than any Terran structure he'd ever seen. The temperature dropped immediately. The air smelled ancient, dust and minerals and something faintly electric like ozone. The hallway widened into a circular chamber, its walls covered in flowing patterns that shimmered in response to their presence. At the center stood a raised platform, and atop it, encased in translucent stasis glass, was a cradle unlike anything Kael had imagined. It was shaped like a cocoon, not mechanical, but organic in structure, veins of faint blue light pulsing through it like a heartbeat. Hovering above it, suspended by no visible force, was a single black crystal, slowly spinning, humming at a frequency Kael couldn't hear, but felt in his bones. "This is where it began," Celia whispered. Kael stepped closer, his eyes locked on the cradle. "This is the original seal?" "One of them," she said. "The first successful one." He glanced at her. "There were others?" Celia nodded. "Attempts. Failures. Sacrifices made in places like this, beneath the earth, away from the eyes of governments. The covenant wasn't forged in ceremony. It was born in desperation." Kael walked around the cradle slowly. "Is it still active?" "Yes," Celia replied, "but incomplete. It needs more than energy. It needs will." He stared at the cradle, unease tightening in his chest. "Why show me this?" "Because you need to understand what they'll ask of you," she said softly. "What the Accord may demand, and what the Xeyari will never trust again." The air felt heavier. Kael ran his fingers over one of the glyphs on the wall. It pulsed at his touch, not with light but memory. Flashes filled his mind, past sentinels, sealed within the cradle, and the silence that followed. Decades, centuries, loneliness wrapped in duty. "They turned this into a prison," Kael murmured. Celia stepped beside him. "Not always. For some, it was a choice. For others, an order." He looked into her eyes. "And for you?" She didn't answer, but the silence between them spoke louder than any oath. The chamber dimmed as Celia moved toward a side alcove, her hand brushing against a vertical panel. A soft click echoed through the stone, and a hidden recess opened, revealing a preserved mural carved into the wall, ancient and haunting. Kael stepped closer. The mural depicted a single figure kneeling before a cradle much like the one in the center of the chamber. Xeyari glyphs spiraled outward like ripples in water, but where peace should have radiated, the carving twisted. The glyphs cracked midway, erupting into jagged lines, chaos overtaking harmony. "This was the first failure," Celia said quietly. "His name was Varric, a warrior. proud, stubborn, and willing. Kael studied the figure. What went wrong? He believed strength was enough, she replied. He thought if he could endure the pain, if his body was powerful enough, he could contain the seal. But it requires more than flesh. She reached up and touched a broken glyph near the center. It pulsed briefly, revealing a brief holographic echo. Varek screaming, encased halfway in the stasis cradle, the process tearing him apart before sealing could complete. Then, darkness. Kael flinched. It killed him. No, Celia said. It unmade him. And worse, it left a wound behind. A psychic backlash so intense it echoed through the glyph network, disrupting entire regions. The Accord thought it was an attack. The Xeyari called it a betrayal. Kael looked back toward the active cradle. So only someone with what? A pure heart. Not purity, she said. Attention. The seal requires more than sacrifice. It demands consent. It tests the very core of who you are. If your reason isn't true, it breaks you. You turned to her, eyes narrowing, and you passed. She nodded once. I volunteered. I was willing. But even now, I wonder if I understood what it meant. Kael sat down on the edge of the platform, the weight of her words anchoring in his chest. And now they think I might be next. I don't know what they think, she said. But the moment you touched the seal, it responded. And now it watches. He looked up at her. Is this why you brought me here? No, Celia answered. I brought you here so you'd understand what they're asking of you. Not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a living promise. Kael felt the pulse shard hum faintly in his pocket. He suddenly wasn't sure if it was a burden or a key. Kael stood alone in the vault. Celia had stepped away to let him think, her silhouette barely visible beyond the glowing glyphs. The stasis cradle pulsed quietly beside him, its rhythmic glow like a slow, deliberate breath. Watching, waiting. He didn't want to look at it anymore. But he couldn't look away. He clenched his fists. His mind reeled with a dozen half-formed thoughts. The Federation searching for him. The Xeyari positioning to strike. Celia's pain. Varek's death. The sound of Vale's unit being torn apart. All of it pointed toward one impossible truth. The seal needed a new sentinel. And somehow, all eyes had landed on him. He walked a slow circle around the cradle. From this angle, it didn't look like a machine. It looked like a tomb carved with mercy. Beautiful. Terrifying. Alive. I'm not ready, he whispered. He thought of his mother, Mira, back on Nova Alera. Her laugh. Her hands. The way she used to trace stars on the wall to help him sleep. He thought of the Wren, his little brother who'd always dreamed bigger than the sky. Always believed Kael was destined for more than duty. They'd never understand this. Hell, he didn't understand this. Behind him, Celia's voice came softly. You don't have to choose today. He turned. But I will have to choose. She nodded. Yes. He stared at her. This being who had been a myth, a memory, a prisoner, and now a guide. Her face held no pressure, only sorrow. She had already lived this burden. She would never force it on anyone. That made it worse. What happens if I say no? He asked. She hesitated. Then the covenant remains broken. The war resumes. And all the silence we bled for will be undone. Kael swallowed hard, the weight pressing in from all sides. And if I say yes? You disappear, she said gently. But you stop the dying. A long silence passed between them. Then Kael looked at the cradle again, its glow now sinking with the thrum of his pulse. I'm not brave, he said. Neither was I, she whispered. The world outside was unraveling. Inside, the cradle waited. And Kael realized that the most dangerous choice wasn't between war and peace. It was between being forgotten and becoming the memory that saved them all. Kael sat in the quiet of the vault, elbows resting on his knees, gaze fixed on nothing in particular. The soft pulses of the stasis cradle behind him cast shifting shadows across the chamber walls, but his mind was elsewhere, far away from Varion Prime. He thought of Earth, of home. In his memory, the streets of Nova Alera shimmered beneath evening rain. Not the kind that drowned or burned, but the kind that made everything glow. Neon signs polished sidewalks, the laughter of kids echoing through narrow alleys. He saw his mother again, Kael Riven, hunched over a stove in their tiny flat, humming old Terran lullabies that didn't belong to any culture but hers. She'd never been a soldier, just a healer, both in title and in spirit. She stitched the broken, held the dying, and never once demanded thanks. She used to place her hand over his heart when he couldn't sleep and say, "You're not alone. Not while I'm breathing." Kael blinked hard and let the memory pass. Then came the run. His little brother, wild-eyed and brilliant, always chasing stars he hadn't yet mapped. He'd called Kael a coward when he enlisted with the Terran Accord, said war wasn't a path but a trap. They hadn't spoken since Kael shipped out. Now Kael was preparing to become something not even the Ren could dream up. He didn't know if the Ren was still alive, didn't know if he'd care. But a piece of Kael hoped, in some far-off moment, that his brother would look up at the stars and somehow understand. Behind him, Celia approached, her steps light on the stone. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside him, close enough for their shoulders to almost touch. "I saw you hesitate," she said softly. Kael didn't deny it. "I'm not built for this." Celia tilted her head. "Neither was my father." That surprised him. He turned to face her. "He wanted to be the SEAL," she continued. "He was chosen by our elders. But the council rejected him, said he lacked attachment. He was too emotional, too attached to life." Kael raised a brow. "That's a reason to disqualify someone?" She gave a quiet, almost bitter laugh. "To the old guard, yes. The SEAL was supposed to be pure, untouched by ties, ambitions, or longing. My father had me. He refused to give that up. What happened to him? They tried to force the transition anyway. He resisted. They called it rebellion. He was executed before the glyphs even opened." Kael felt something tighten in his chest. "They killed him for being a father. For being human," she corrected, though the irony wasn't lost on either of them. Silence settled again. But now it was shared, woven between parallel losses, mirrored lives. One born of Earth, the other of Lorraine, both children of a peace forged in chains. "He never regretted it," she said. "Even in his final breath, he told me, better to die whole than live hollow." Kael looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. "And if I'm not whole?" She turned to him, her voice firm but warm. "Then let this choice make you whole." They sat there a moment longer, side by side in the dim glow of ancient memory, two legacies colliding beneath a planet still echoing with unfinished oaths. Kael stood at the base of the stasis cradle, the pulse shard pulsing in his palm like a living heartbeat. The chamber had fallen still, not just quiet, but hollow, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Across from him, Celia watched, eyes unreadable, arms at her sides. "I'll do it," Kael said aloud, though his voice barely echoed. The moment the words left his mouth, the glyphs embedded in the stone walls flared to life. First gold, then shifting through tones of deep blue and violet. A hum filled the vault, rising not from the air, but from somewhere beneath reality. Then came the voices, not spoken, not audible in the conventional sense, but they filled Kael's mind in overlapping layers, tones and cadences he couldn't describe, as if emotion itself had found language. He staggered backward. His knees buckled, and Celia caught him by the shoulder. "They've heard you," she whispered. "The High Council of Xeyari, what remains of it. You've been accepted into the archive of judgment." "I didn't expect this," Kael gasped, pressing the shard tighter. "No one does." In his mind's eye, a sphere of starlight opened, an imagined council chamber suspended in darkness. 10 thrones formed a ring, each occupied by a presence more than a person. They were minds etched in psionic memory, ancient fragments of leaders who once ruled the stars. Their robes were light itself, their faces shifting mosaics of past and present. One voice surged forward, low and heavy. "This Terran is unfit. He carries grief. He carries fear." Another replied, sharper, mournful. "He carries love. He has not fled. He stands. That is more than many before him." A third, whisper thin and bitter. "He is flesh. Mortal." The last failed sentinel was Xeyari, and we lost generations cleaning up the aftermath. Kael gritted his teeth. "I'm still here," he muttered under his breath. One voice rose above the others, not louder, but deeper, older. It spoke not in words, but in memory. Kael was suddenly a child again, standing in a ruined garden, reaching for a tree that no longer bloomed. Then he was a soldier. Then he was a brother. Then he was neither, just willing. The ancient voice thundered. Willingness is rare. Rarity is sacred. Let it be tested. The council chamber faded, but not before Kael felt a part of himself left behind, copied, examined, woven into a great web of remembrance. He opened his eyes. His legs were shaking. Celia steadied him with both hands. What did they say? They argued. They feared. But one of them understood. She nodded slowly. That was Elder Thale. He was the one who once voted for my father. He remembers what it means to choose, not to comply. Kael exhaled, trying to calm the storm in his chest. So what happens now? The cradle responds only when the council has seen and does not deny, she said. And now, it waits for you. Kael looked toward the glowing cocoon. The air around it was warmer now, more alive. The glyphs had stopped flickering. They pulsed in rhythm with his breath. He wasn't ready, but maybe readiness wasn't the point. The moment Kael stepped onto the platform, the temperature in the chamber shifted. The vault no longer felt ancient. It felt aware. The air thickened with anticipation, not oppressive, but reverent, like the space itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. Celia stood beside the stasis cradle, her expression unreadable, her posture still. She said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. Kael reached out and placed the pulse shard onto the central pedestal at the cradle's base. The shard pulsed once, then dissolved into threads of light that wrapped around the cradle, sinking into its surface like veins rediscovering blood. The cradle opened. Its outer shell unfolded in silence, each segment moving with eerie fluidity. It didn't creak or groan. It expanded like a living organism stretching after a long sleep. Inside, soft light emanated from a biomesh lining that shimmered with layered glyphs. The structure looked like it had grown to hold a single form. Kael turned to Celia. Will it hurt? She met his eyes. Only where you're still holding on. He nodded once. No further words passed between them. He stepped into the cradle. It accepted him. Not like a machine accepting a command, but like soil welcoming a seed. The interior adjusted around his limbs, molding to his shape. Not restrictive, embracing. The moment his back touched the inner curve, he felt the warmth, not physical, but emotional, as though 1,000 memories waited just beneath the surface, ready to wrap themselves around him. Then the cradle closed. The outer segments folded back over him, layer by layer, until only a faint outline of his form remained visible beneath the glowing surface. The glyphs around the chamber ignited in synchrony, casting the vault in golden light. And then came the song. Celia stepped forward just inches from the sealed cradle. Her voice rose, soft and trembling, carrying a melody older than Terran history. It wasn't a song meant for battle, nor for mourning. It was a lullaby for the forgotten. A hymn once sung by mothers to children before the sky turned red. A peace ritual, whispered across dying planets in the hope that someone, somewhere, would remember how to heal. Her voice echoed across the stone, amplified by the chamber's resonance. Each note danced along the glowing walls, synchronizing with the rhythms of the cradle. And inside, Kael heard it, not with ears, but with memory. Her voice traveled into him, through him, unlocking doors he hadn't known were closed. He saw Mira again, singing to him on stormy nights. Saw Theron building makeshift star maps from ceiling lights. Saw Ellen, the little girl back at the outpost, staring at the statue with eyes full of wonder. Every connection he'd buried beneath duty surfaced at once. And then, the transformation began. The cradle's inner lining pulsed with bioluminescence, sinking to Kael's heart rate, then surpassing it. Something deeper began to stir. His thoughts fractured and reformed. His breath became rhythm. His blood slowed, stilled, and changed. He felt the world around him blur. Not fade, but expand. He could feel the sand above the chamber. The winds crossing Varion Prime's surface. the pulse of Terran's satellites scanning for him. The lingering gaze of the Xeyari strike fleet in orbit. He wasn't just in the world now. He was part of it. The cradle cocooned tighter, not in constraint, but in union. The symbols on its shell glowed in harmony with the vault's glyphs. Across the stone, one new glyph formed, unseen for centuries. Acceptance. Celia's song slowed, then stopped. Her hand pressed gently against the cradle's surface, right where Kael's heart rested beneath. "You're not alone," she whispered. And for the first time, Kael believed it. Kael drifted between thought and nothingness. The world outside the cradle no longer felt separate. It became a murmur beneath his skin. He could no longer move his arms nor feel the weight of his body. There was no pain, no fear, only a quiet stillness that stretched beyond time. And then the memories came. Not his. At first, they were faint. A Xeyari child chasing light beetles across a bioluminescent field. A young Terran soldier cradling his brother's dog tags beside a shattered moon. A mother in Lorikhin braiding her daughter's hair as the sky trembled with approaching war. The cradle did not erase Kael, it expanded him. He began to see through the eyes of generations. Walked in the footsteps of strangers long forgotten by both history and blood. Each memory etched itself gently into his mind, not to overwhelm, but to connect. The glyphs that lined the inside of the cradle weren't decorations. They were vessels. Each one a story, each story a seed, and Kael was now soil. He became the silent witness of thousands. Time moved strangely here. He felt days, months, years, though only minutes had passed outside. He witnessed the signing of the first covenant in Resonant Hollow. Saw Admiral Rack's thorn in his youth, fire in his eyes, trembling as he ordered the last orbital strike of the war. He saw Celia, cradled in her father's arms, watching him bleed as the council turned away. And then he felt her loneliness. It was deeper than silence, the kind of loneliness that settles into the soul like ash. He saw her sealed, aware but unmoving beneath the outpost. Saw the faces of generations who walked past her without knowing. Heard the echo of children laughing, soldiers cursing, engineers repairing the very walls that caged her. He had thought her strong because she'd survived. Now he understood. She had endured. Kael's own memories surfaced to meet hers. Myra's touch, Theron's laughter, the sting of disappointment when his choices pulled him further from the life he'd once known. But instead of guilt, the cradle offered stillness. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just presence. A kind of sacred observation that made all pain feel whole. And with that, Kael understood what it meant to become the Sentinel. Not a warrior, not a symbol, but a keeper. A lighthouse standing still while the tide of time crashed endlessly against it. He would not act. He would not speak. He would witness. Outside, the chamber had gone quiet. Celia stood alone, watching the cradle pulse slowly. The glyphs had dimmed now, returning to their resting state. She didn't sing anymore. She didn't need to. Her voice now lived inside the man sealed within. She whispered, not to the chamber, but to the stillness itself. "You see now." And in the silence, she swore. Something within the cradle heard her. The dawn outside Resonant Hollow broke slowly, as if the planet itself hesitated to disturb what had just taken place beneath its surface. Inside the vault, the glow of the stasis cradle had stabilized. The glyphs were no longer pulsing with urgency, but instead radiated a soft, steady warmth, like a heartbeat at rest. The chamber had grown quiet again, not from emptiness, but from fulfillment. Kael Riven was no longer just a soldier, or a son, or a brother. He had become something more. Celia approached the cradle with careful steps, her hand brushing along the smooth arc of its shell. There was no sign of movement inside, only the silhouette of Kael's body, faintly outlined beneath the translucent surface. His features were peaceful, eyes closed, arms gently crossed over his chest like someone simply asleep. She placed her hand where his heart would be. A faint thrum answered her touch. Not fast, not mechanical, just steady, Present. You're still here, she whispered. She knelt before him, lowering her forehead to the cradle. Her breath fogged the surface slightly, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes. I wish I could tell you what comes next, she said softly. But I think you already know more than I ever did. Silence stretched around her, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt alive. Celia reached into a pouch at her waist and pulled out a small stone, a keepsake she'd carried since childhood. Smooth, dark green, carved with a single glyph, balance. Her father had given it to her the day the council denied him the right to be the seal. She had kept it through war, exile, and centuries of silence. She placed it at the base of the cradle. Then she stood. Celia leaned down slowly and pressed a kiss to Kael's forehead, soft, deliberate, the mirror to the moment he had once touched hers in ignorance, not knowing he was awakening a legend. Now, she was the one who completed the symmetry. As she pulled back, her eyes stung, not from grief, but from something deeper. Reverence. Hope. The kind that only blooms when sacrifice has purpose. She smiled, and in the soft light of the cradle, she saw it. Just for a second, a twitch of Kael's lips. Faint, subtle, but unmistakably. A smile. Not for her. Not even for the world he had saved, but for the peace that had finally found him. A decade passed like a breath held and finally released. Varion Prime, once the scarred heart of a dying peace, now pulsed with quiet life. The craters had softened, reclaimed by moss and mineral. The winds that once screamed across the jagged plains now whispered through rebuilt towers and replanted groves. And above it all, the sky remained mercifully clear. No warships, no warnings, just starlight. The war never resumed. Though fleets had gathered, weapons had been charged, and political councils had teetered on the edge, no one gave the order. Not the Xeyari ascendancy, not the Terran Accord. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps reverence. But many believed it was something deeper, the presence of a new sentinel, unspoken but undeniable, anchored beneath the surface of Varion Prime. Kael Riven's name was never declared a martyr's. No official records marked the moment he entered the cradle. The Unified Terran Council issued only a brief statement about containment stabilization and regional memory sanctuaries. But everyone knew. From Nova Ilera to the outer colonies, word passed through whispers, paintings, poems. The man who had once broken a statue had become one, and in doing so, healed a fracture in history. The Xeyari, for their part, did not celebrate, but they withdrew. They declassified fragments of the Covenant's original intent. They offered joint restoration teams to help repair the resonant hollow. And, in a gesture unheard of since before the first strike, a Xeyari delegate walked unarmed into a Terran Council chamber and placed a single stone on the table, marked not with dominance, but with balance. From that moment forward, the Alliance of the Hollow was born. It was neither a treaty nor a truce. It was a pact of remembrance, rooted not in policy, but in shared silence. It had no anthem, no flag, but it endured because it was guarded not by armies, but by the living memory of one man who never spoke again. Kael's sacrifice was never politicized, not officially, but his presence lingered in every conversation about coexistence. His silhouette appeared in murals across crater cities and cloud stations. And when arguments flared in government halls, it became common for someone to say, "Remember who stood still." Varion Prime did not forget. The planet that once bore the weight of two civilizations' anger had become a sanctuary, not because it was rebuilt, but because he remained beneath it. And above all else, in a galaxy forever changed, peace did not return. It continued. At the center of the old outpost, now a quiet memorial garden draped in flowering vines and silverstone paths, stood a statue unlike any other. It was tall, lifelike, and eerily serene. Kael Riven's likeness had been captured in exquisite detail. Arms relaxed at his sides, shoulders slightly back, and one hand extended outward, not in salute, not in defiance, but in invitation. His eyes remained closed, not as a symbol of sleep or surrender, but as if listening to something the rest of the world couldn't hear. There was no plaque, no name carved beneath, no official symbol of the Terran Accord or the Unified Council. And still, everyone knew who it was. Children were taught to walk slowly around the garden, to speak softly. The air near the statue always felt different, not sacred exactly, but aware. Birds never landed on the outstretched hand. Leaves never settled on the shoulders. Some said it was coincidence. Others, a field generator hidden beneath. But most believed it was Kael himself, still watching, still listening, still there. No one was allowed to touch the statue. After an incident years ago, when a visiting dignitary placed their hand on the stone and collapsed for what they later described as an overwhelming flood of memory, a protective boundary was quietly installed. Not a barrier of force, but of intention. The glyphs on the base could detect proximity, and they responded not with alarm, but with silence. A silence that pressed gently against the soul. Those who visited often spoke of strange sensations afterward. Not visions, not hallucinations, just clarity. A memory resurfaced. A decision made easier. A pain let go. Veterans came to weep. Young couples came to promise. And always, they left with the same whispered words. He's not dead. Even Admiral Thorne, now long retired, had visited once, unannounced, alone, walking with a cane. He stood before the statue for exactly 7 minutes, said nothing, saluted once, and left. It became a tradition that no Terran or Xeyari dared break. The Garden of the Sentinel was not to be claimed. It belonged to memory, and the man within the stone, with eyes forever closed and a hand forever open, remained not a monument, but a quiet presence. Kael Riven had never believed in ghosts. Even now, a decade into his position within the unified Terran Council, surrounded by fleets, data, and policy briefings, he clung to logic like armor. But logic had never explained why his brother disappeared without a trace. Why there had never been a body. Why no transmission, no black box, no debriefing file ever reached his desk, despite his clearance. He had searched, quietly, methodically, year after year, not to accuse, not to avenge, but to understand. In the Council's archives, buried beneath layers of redacted reports and classified planetary studies, Kael found gaps, strange ones. Communications blackouts around the time of the final Varian Prime activation. Sensor anomalies misfiled as environmental irregularities. Mentions of a containment stabilization event that aligned far too neatly with the disappearance of Kael Riven. And then there was the statue. The first time Kael saw it in person, he froze. He'd seen holos, of course, paintings, newsfeed captures, even diplomatic VR tours. But standing in front of it was different. Kael wasn't just rendered, he was present. The stance, the quiet defiance, the slight lift of his jaw, all exactly as Kael remembered. Except the hand. The outstretched hand hadn't been Kael's signature. Not in life. Not in any photo. So why was it here? Kael reached for it once, just once, but stopped short. Not because of the boundary, but because something inside him recoiled, as if his instincts knew what his intellect refused to say. This isn't a statue, he muttered under his breath. It's a signal. He started interviewing others, off the record. Former engineers from Varian Prime. Diplomats who'd met with Xeyari envoys. Celia Nor's name came up more than once, though never directly. Always spoken with reverence, or fear, or both. Eventually, his inquiries slowed. Not for lack of interest, but from a quiet understanding he hadn't expected. Some truths weren't hidden. They were protected. Because the moment he began to accept what might have happened, what Kael might have become, Kael also realized, if it were true, then Kael had chosen silence. And Kael would honor it. Still, he visited the statue every year on the same date. He'd stand in the garden with a datapad tucked under his arm and a file in his pocket he never opened. Not anymore. He would stare at his brother's face, let the silence settle over him like a shroud, and whisper the same 3 words before he left. I found you. And in that stillness, though the stone never moved, Kael felt something shift. as if someone had heard. She never used the front path. Celia came at night, always through the eastern gate, half overgrown with flowering vines and overlooked by most security drones. She wore a Terran cloak, its hood drawn low, and moved with the quiet grace of someone who had once been forgotten by time and now chose invisibility over reverence. The garden was different under starlight. Softer. The stone path shimmered faintly from the bioluminescent moss that had taken root over the years. The statue, Kael's form, stood at the center as always, hand outstretched, eyes closed, the glow of distant moons tracing the edges of his face. Celia stood before him, silent at first. Then she sang. The song had no title. It had no lyrics, just a melody older than Earth's oldest languages, passed through generations of Xeyari mothers to their children. It was a song of memory, of mourning, of return. And she had sung it once before, on the day Kael entered the cradle. She sang it again tonight, not for ceremony, but for connection. "You're not alone," she whispered between verses. Even now, sometimes she spoke to him. Not every visit, and never for long. But when she did, her voice carried stories of the world he had helped save. Of how Varian Prime now hosted Terran and Xeyari researchers side by side. Of children learning both glyphs and alphabet. Of disputes that ended in dialogue instead of fire. She told him about Ellen, the girl from the outpost, now grown, studying diplomacy. About Darun, who had stopped digging and started teaching. About Mira Riven's name being etched on a peace stone in Nova Alera. And sometimes, she simply sat. Just sat. Because there were things she didn't need to say. Wounds that didn't need explaining. Questions she had long stopped asking. It wasn't closure she came for. It was continuity. A tether to the only person who had seen her, not as a relic or a threat, but as something human. She never stayed until dawn. That was part of the quiet pact. But before she left, she always did the same thing. She stepped close to the statue, pressed her palm to the base, and closed her eyes. Every time, the glyph beneath her hand warmed slightly, just enough to let her know he still heard her, still bore witness, still remembered. And when she walked away, disappearing again into the silver darkness, the garden fell still behind her. But not empty, never empty. The child broke the silence like a whisper in a cathedral. She couldn't have been more than 6, wide eyes, messy hair, a small green jacket 2 sizes too big. Her mother walked a few paces behind, reading something on her wrist pad, unaware the girl had stopped. They were tourists, most likely, first-time visitors to the garden. It was late afternoon, the sun low, casting long shadows across the paths. The air carried the scent of rustling leaves and gentle soil. The child stood in front of the statue with her head tilted, as if trying to solve a puzzle only she could see. She didn't speak right away, just stared. Then she tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she said, pointing. "He's smiling." Her mother looked up, startled. She followed the child's finger toward the statue, her expression shifting from distracted to mildly concerned. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "That's just the way the light hits the stone. But it's different now," the girl insisted, eyes wide with quiet certainty. "He didn't smile before. He's smiling now." The mother hesitated, crouched beside her daughter, and looked again. Just for a moment. And in that moment, something did look different. Not dramatic, not obvious, but subtle, like the corners of the statue's mouth had lifted a fraction of a breath. A warmth, barely perceptible, etched into cold stone. They stood in silence. Then the mother rose, took her daughter's hand, and walked away without another word. But she glanced back, only once. The girl kept looking, even as they reached the gate. And for the rest of that day, the garden felt a little lighter, the air a little softer. The wind that rustled through the vines carried something new. Not just memory, but wonder. And the man with eyes closed and hand outstretched remained still, unchanged, and yet somehow more alive than ever. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If this story made you feel something, even just a little, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone you love. More stories are on the way, and I'll be right here, ready to tell the next one whenever you're ready to listen.